Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar from Real Story Group. We're super excited today to talk through this presentation on AI feature redundancy. With me today is our founder and CEO, Tony Byrne, along with one of our principal analysts, Scott Simmons. And Scott and Tony will take you through the majority of today's session, but I do want to kick things off real quick with a couple of housekeeping items of note. We will have time at the end for questions, so you can enter those into the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. Any questions, anecdotes you'd like to share, or feedback on the session, feel free to enter that in. And then a recording of this will be available within the next couple of days, and so you can keep an eye out for that if you want to share this with the rest of your team. Just to get you started, a little bit about Real Story Group, as I do see a number of new folks on the line today. We are a little bit different when it comes to the analyst space. We strictly sit on the buyer side of the table when it comes to the relationship between MarTech buyers and MarTech vendors. We never work for the vendors we cover in any way, shape, or form. So we're always putting your best interest in mind as we're going through, whether that be a vendor evaluation process with you, or advising you more on your MarTech stack as a whole. That's something that we've been doing quite often over the last several years, and several of the folks that we work with also have joined our exclusive MarTech Stack Leadership Council. That's a group of MarTech decision makers that meets quarterly. We have our next meeting coming up next month in Houston, and if you'd like to learn more about that, you can reach out to us after today's session. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony and Scott to really kick us off today, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Scott D. I'm going to just lay out a little bit of the problem set here, which I think a lot of you will recognize, but it's worth framing this properly before my colleague Scott S. gets into how to resolve it. So first thing is, why are we having this conversation today at all? And you know already that every MarTech, and I mean every MarTech and digital vendor right now, is shipping AI and agentic features. Part of this is because they're under great pressure from their investors to do it, which also signals that there's potentially a little bit of shallowness here. But the feature velocity is extremely high, even if the impactfulness is not always clear. And so as an enterprise, most, if not all of you, are kind of struggling to determine where the real value exists. And certainly the MarTech leaders that we talk to have this begets a really simple question for them, which is, where should AI actually live in our architecture? That's a complicated question, but we're going to introduce today what we call an AI Redundancy Audit, which is a scenario-based framework for identifying, where is there overlap between different ISV offerings as well as your own kind of internal efforts, and really helping you focus your investments. So this is an example using our own MarTech reference model here of sort of agentic sprawl. My colleague Apurv put this together. And agents are kind of becoming, in a sense, a kind of a wrapper for all of the other AI capabilities where vendors are trying to link them. And so you've got various AI services, and then agentic services on top of that, typically done within the vendor platforms, and it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. The key thing here, of course, is within the platform, and so of course that limits what the agent can do, but also it kind of limits whatever AI services you're doing. So at Real Story Group, we always, when we see this kind of, quite frankly, chaos, we try to go back to a core reference model. So let's take a look at that. This is a target reference model for AI. And so there's a certain purity to this that isn't always going to be 100% replicable in the real world, but it's a target, right? And it basically says, look, first of all, there's 3 different types of AI: insights, decisioning, and generative, and you ought to understand the differences among those, and understand how they're going to need to work together for you to really have business, real business value here. But also within each of them, there's different use cases that you may want to apply, or different business scenarios, and you need to be clear about which ones of those that you want to light up, as opposed to what a vendor is lighting up for you. The other thing is that agentic AI over on the left is kind of a fourth category that tries to wrap a number of these services together into some sort of broader automation. Again, we make a distinction between workflow automation, which you would see within a tool, and then stack orchestration, which you typically have to build, and that goes across tools. So this model is really an argument that you ought to think about AI, at least in the long run, as a layer in your stack. And part of that is because as an enterprise buyer, you have to be very cognizant, and you want to be very cognizant of what we have over on the right, which is responsible AI. There's various dimensions to that. I don't need to lecture you about this. I think you all know this is super important. But one of the things, obviously, that you don't want to be doing is having to vet 30 different vendors on their AI capabilities. And so inevitably, this is going to push a lot of you to dealing with this more as a layer. But that layer is typically going to then interact potentially with AI services that are within different platforms. And of course, the foundational platforms underneath in terms of customer data stores, omnichannel content platform, and so forth are really critical to this, because without those kind of basics in play, you're going to have a garbage in, garbage out type scenario with AI. So this is a target reference model that kind of informs some of our overall thinking and our long-term guidance for you. But let's take a look at maybe a little bit less to be and a little bit more as is here, where the initial conversations were really focused on kind of adoption and trialing and that some of the things. But now we see kind of two simultaneous risks that we're keeping in mind at the same time here, which is that organizations are a little bit on two prongs here. You're saying, on the one hand, there's this unchecked accumulation of potential AI services across every vendor in your stack. And then there's a lot of you are coming at us basically with a kind of a cautious non-adoption, which is I'm looking at this profusion and I'm saying none of the above, because I can't wrestle the governance and the vetting and everything else to get there. So on the one hand, there's AI profusion, which we see a little bit more in the mid-market, but you certainly risk it at the enterprise level. And then AI paralysis, which is just overwhelmed quite appropriately by all these different, vendor claims. And so how do we then, sort of unlock this and get some real value out of this without, dealing with these issues of bloat? But first, I think it's worth laying out, what are some of the risks here for you in terms of going kind of with option, with option A. So, we have some anti-patterns, and then what we think is kind of more federated 2.0. So, we have these embedded intelligence inside individual tools, copy generation in your CMS or your marketing automation platform, auto tagging and DAM, predictive scoring in your CDP, probably not the right place for it, but but the vendors are all lighting it up. Co-pilots in your CRM, again, probably not the right place for that either, but vendors are lighting it up. So these are just various capabilities among those three categories. But if you're going to pursue an agentic architecture, and we think this is where this all kind of comes together, probably is going to look very different. It's going to span multiple platforms. It's going to require shared context and decision logic. So that starts getting tricky. Orchestration, governance, and memory, of course, and coordination across data platforms and applications. And so what this means, among other things, is that you typically are not going to buy an agentic architecture. You're likely going to be assembling one. And so then the question is, you're assembling the various piece parts from what agentic services, whether from a vendor or from, your own AI kind of layer. And so let's talk about, the potential risks of leaning a little bit too heavily on the vendor side here. Is that as AI spreads across the stack, you're going to have, first of all, great risks of user experience incoherence, right? So this is already a challenge for you even before AI. We know this is a challenge for all of us. You're really compounding it if you're having different AI-based intelligence services embedded within different tools. And the next three bullets kind of expound on that. You're going to have data flowing through different insights layers, which is inevitably going to lead to different outcomes. You have multiple agents potentially making decisions in an intra-platform context without the essential shared context that they need to do this right. You're going to have conflicting recommendations from different systems. It's inevitable right? If you seat those recommendations just within a particular silo. And then of course, governance and compliance gaps. So this idea of redundancy here definitely increases costs, and the incoherence increases risks and decreases effectiveness, really. So as you really move from prototype to production, as you start thinking through your AI strategies and wanting to execute against them, architectural clarity is going to become really, really important here, increasingly important. And so with that, I'll turn it over from the kind of scary as is world to Scott to kind of round this out and then talk about what is an approach for addressing this.
Thanks, Tony. So I might get a little repetitive here, but I want to kind of ground us in what we're seeing, and then kind of expand on how we can fix the problem. So the pattern across our clients is surprisingly consistent. First, multiple co-pilots generating similar marketing content. As Tony mentioned, a CMS might have one, a marketing automation platform might have another, CRM system might even add something, and sometimes you might have other content platforms like your DAM or your OCP that might add another layer. And second, duplicate tagging and classification systems. DAM platforms also often have auto tagging. CMS platforms increasingly do it as well. And then you might have a PIM that may introduce it there as its own enrichment layer. And sometimes separate AI enrichment tools are even added on top of all of that. Third, predictive models begin appearing everywhere, right? The CDP may offer predictive segmentation. The marketing automation systems may each offer their next best action capabilities. And your CRM may even introduce its own scoring models. And then analytics tools may generate predictive insights on top of it all. Then we start to see agent-style capabilities interacting with the same customer data from multiple systems. Each one is optimized for its own application, but they are really coordinated. And finally, there's the cost dimension that often catches organizations off guard. Many of these features are usage-based, token consumption, API calls, inference costs. Individually, they all look modest, but collectively, they can easily exceed budgets. What's interesting is that vendors describe these capabilities very differently. Different interfaces, different labels, different marketing language. But when you step back and examine the architecture, many of them rely on very similar intelligence layers. And that's where the bloat begins to show itself. So how do we untangle this? The biggest mistake is starting with vendor features. Does the system have AI tagging? What does the platform have? Does the platform have an agent? Which vendor has the strongest co-pilot? Those questions sound logical, but they lead you straight to kind of feature comparison. The better starting point, as with everything that we do at RSG, is business scenarios. What are the marketing activities where AI might produce value? For most organizations, those scenarios are fairly consistent with varying nuance. Content creation and campaign assembly, asset tagging and discovery, audience targeting and segmentation, journey optimization, and insight generation and decision support. Once you anchor the conversation around the scenarios, you can map the AI capabilities that support them across the stack. And that is when redundancy becomes visible. You might discover 3 different tools are generating campaign copy. 2 systems are predicting customer churn. 4 systems are tagging assets. Then when you look through the lens of scenarios rather than vendors, the architecture suddenly becomes clearer. So this is the problem the AI Redundancy Audit is designed to solve. The goal is to not eliminate AI capabilities. It's to understand where intelligence lives within your architecture and how it should be organized. The audit works through 4 steps. First, we map the AI surface area. Where does AI exist in the stack? Which vendors provide it? Who owns it internally? And what models are being used? Many organizations discover at this point that they have far more AI embedded in their stack than they realize. The second step is identifying functional overlap. Where are we generating similar outputs across multiple systems? Where are predictive models solving the same problem? And where are agent capabilities interacting with the same data sets? Third, we assess cost and risk density. AI introduces new cost patterns through API usage and model consumption. It also introduces governance exposure when data moves through multiple AI layers. And finally, we classify strategic value. Some AI capabilities are truly differentiating, some are operationally useful but not unique, and some are just table stakes. Frankly, most of it's vendor theater. We're trying to kind of work through all of that. So the audit, as with most tools, in the end is a fairly large spreadsheet, but it's the process around it that kind of drives the value. So the structured tool, we use a structured tool to make the process practical. The first part focuses on scenario prioritization. So we identify the marketing scenarios that matter most to the organization, and we score them by two simple factors, right? This isn't a extensive scoring sheet. We're just trying to get kind of two basic values so that we can understand what's providing the most value within the org. We use basically business value and frequency of use. That helps ensure we focus our analysis on the capabilities that move the needle. The second component is a capability inventory. So here we catalog the AI capabilities across the stack, which vendors provide them, which teams own them, and what dependencies exist underneath. This is often where the most surprising insights emerge, because overlapping functionality becomes visible very quickly. The tool then produces several outputs. You get a clear visualization of redundancy across the stack. You get scoring that helps you weigh value against complexity. And most importantly, you get guidance about where to consolidate capabilities, where to govern them more tightly, and where to scale investment. The audit becomes not just an assessment, but a decision framework. The broader objective here is to move from AI feature accumulation to capability portfolio management. Right now, AI features simply accumulate. Every product release adds something. Every roadmap introduces another capability. But very few organizations manage AI as a portfolio. And when you do this, you can ask better questions. Which intelligence layers are truly strategic? Which ones are redundant? Where do we want to centralize governance? Where do we want to allow innovation at the application layer? That shift in perspective tends to bring a lot more clarity to investment decisions. So, did I miss a slide? Yeah. It's also important to clarify what we mean by rationalization. This is not about eliminating innovation or cutting AI capabilities across the board. This is about directing investment toward the layers that create the most value. In practice, rationalization often leads to outcomes like consolidating duplicate generative capabilities, reducing redundant copilot and prediction engines, centralizing governance for models and training data, and building orchestration layers where cross-system coordination is required. The objective is not fewer AI features. The objective is coherent intelligence across the architecture. So let me close with a few takeaways. AI is spreading very quickly across the MarTech stack. Enterprises now face two simultaneous risks: unchecked accumulation of AI capabilities and stalled adoption because the landscape is too complex to navigate. Embedded AI features inside individual platforms are not the same thing as true enterprise agentic architecture. And one of the most effective ways to bring clarity to this landscape is through scenario-based analysis that reveals where real value exists. When organizations take that approach, the conversation shifts from vendor hype to architectural strategy. And that is where much better decisions tend to happen. Tony, anything to add?
No, except that I'm glad that you brought up that one issue, which I think we may have underplayed a little bit here, Scott, around cost. And right now, it's a kind of a funny liminal time where vendors are sometimes eating some of these costs. That's not on the assumption that those costs are going to fall. You know that AI and particularly agentic work is very processor intensive, and they're therefore likely to continue to be expensive, especially as they do more complex, high value work. And so there's significant issues here around cost rationalization, and I think that's worth just flagging a little bit more. Great. So friendly reminder that you can feel free to add any questions or comments. Scott Dill's gonna talk about next steps here shortly. You can add any questions or comments in the GoToWebinar control panel, or just share any anecdotes or anything you disagree with. And we're gonna have time to cover that today. Already a couple of questions are accumulating, but before we turn to that, Scott, we wanna wrap us up here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Great presentation as always. And if this is something that you're looking to explore a little bit further, you're welcome to reach out to us. My coordinates are here, sdill@realstorygroup.com, and happy to have more of a one-on-one conversation with you to talk through this process and how it would apply within your organization. We had a similar webinar last month around AI and the content supply chain, so you can look at that in the webinar library that we have. And we have another presentation coming up in a few weeks that'll focus more around agentic AI. So stay tuned on that. I do see a question that's come in. I don't know if you guys can see that one as well.
Yeah. So I'll start by asking you the question Scott asked. Maybe you can just advance the slides here. So the first one is to identify the scenarios and prioritize them. Is a cross-functional team at the enterprise involved? How do you sell an impatient organization on this foundational work?
So, if we were starting from scratch, we would definitely probably need to go in and talk to a larger kind of breadth of the organization itself. But as I mentioned earlier, like the scenarios that we're seeing are fairly consistent. So we have a base that we can start with. The trick is getting to the nuance, right? Your organization will have small things that are different across the variety of use cases that we've identified. So we can have a series of discovery sessions. We would generally start with your marketing organization, but if we need to, we can extend out into those other groups to get input if the AI is drilling that far.
Yeah, and I'd add, actually, this is kind of where the fun is. These are exciting conversations. It's really about business opportunity. We then do the difficult heavy lifting of translating that into a technology and process roadmap that actually is going to make sense. So to that extent, we find that these are very often creative brainstorming sessions around possibilities. Sometimes we need to play the grump and say, the world is not ready to do what you would like to do, but I think the conversations typically are brief and creative. So that's the good news, because we can typically get to results pretty quickly. Another question, Scott, is Justine is asking, she's saying, I saw your comment that agentic AI is mostly a build operation right now. Could we just bypass the AI that's in our vendors and just use their APIs instead when we construct AI and agents for our stack?
And that's a big it depends. Right? Some of the platforms are exposing the appropriate APIs so that you can make use of the technology. Others are not. So an audit, like I've laid out, kind of helps identify that problem. Like where is the best place to make use of, or what agentic technology would be best to make use of? In which systems may you still need to rely on the agents that are being provided, because it's the only way to do the work. The hope is we're moving to a more open architecture, but that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, and there's definitely historical parallels here. I mean, we've seen this with vendor resistance to enabling their other vendors to inject services into their environment or to extract services from their environment. Every vendor tends to think of themselves as the sun in your solar system and not a planet. And it's going to take some push from us, those of us who are in industry, and then our industry analysts, and especially you, the enterprise customer, Justine, to really press for this kind of openness and to ask for it in your QBRs and your renewal conversations and your new business selection, and to really make this a critical precondition of signing on with a vendor, that you can invoke particular outcomes by using your own AI, as opposed to having to invoke theirs locally, because that creates, as Scott mentioned, all kinds of potential problems for you. So I think you're thinking about this in a productive way, but to Scott's point, you may not always be able to execute on that. And I think that's an area of discerning which approach where RSG could really help you. So thanks for asking that.
The walled gardens still exist. And
yeah. Yeah, and the vendors themselves can be walled gardens. So great. But there's answers out there, and so we're happy to can help you convert your enthusiasm into a real roadmap. So with that, we'll wrap it up here. Look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, just ping Scott Dill here. Bye for now.